We'll be hearing some comments and some insights from Dr. Sharif Delawar about what we have been doing yesterday and today and the whole process that we did. Of course, he needs no introduction, but I must say that he's a member of the Board of Trustees of the National Training Institute, chaired by His Excellency the President of Egypt, and he will be giving us some insights about the work that they are doing regarding the human capital and all the work that we are to support our youth. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharif.
Thank you, Dr. Marwa, for allowing to have those comments by slides. It will not as comments. There are just 3 or 4 minutes with 5 or 6 slides.
رائحة أمام حضراتكم. Progress, as I claim, well, progress. I think that all points raised would be submitted to all officials. Progress, as we've seen, and this is an orientation embarked upon in order to reach out to digitization as well as the fourth industrial revolution, is based on the new principle of economic development, which is economic growth and development based on innovation. There has been enormous change. Economic concepts have radically changed. So we have to take all these new concepts or changed concepts into account. Human capital, I can assert you that not only through the Presidential Youth Academy, but also and on all fronts, we have been stumbling into, of course, into difficulties. There have been some errors, but actually there has been a flurry of moves in order to groom youth as people who are going to embark upon the future. We have heard about a lot of things on sustainable development. So we remembered yesterday, when looking upon the future, conducting a foresight that new jobs will be created and new jobs should be, and universities and institutions should take well into account that new jobs will be will be created, in which case all these universities and institutions should groom youth in order to assume for this post. I'm not speaking in the name of the state. I'm neutral, but I can claim that everything I say is taken into consideration when developing programs. We should also consider all the skills demanded by these new jobs. Our schools, our universities should reconsider skills imparted to students. École 42 has been created. Doesn't give certificates, it gives only skills. And there's another one in California, and a lot of people queue up for these two colleges, and these two are being financed by big and large entities across the world. So we need skills for the future in order to fulfill the 4 points, the 4 pillars I mentioned earlier as pillars of development. This is the Egypt Vision 2030, which we have been talking about, dialogue about 2050. The 17 sustainable development goals. there has been an orientation for the future. Last October, only last October, an important document has been released on the vision for 2050, based on what we have been studying. By having studied future global trends considered, we've released this 2050 document. We have to work hard in order to fulfill these important 4 points. 4 points for 2050. Future built on knowledge and human resources. Economy based on protecting, developing natural resources, based on modern production factors, including artificial intelligence and AI, labor, capital, and artificial intelligence are the concept of land has been struck off all new theories. Economy should be based on investment and transferring and indigenization of technology. The fifth point, as a pillar for 2050, is a diversified economy based on innovation and on information-intensive industries. This is ultimately leads to increase and steps up the welfare of Egyptian citizens. There have been so many trends. Thank you very much. We do hope that this dialogue will be inspiring and supplementary to what we are going to do in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharif, for your remarks. As you said, I would like to say that what we are doing is complementary work, مكمل فعلا, and we work with coordination with all the ministries and all the entities that is concerned with development and sustainable development. This is an important thing. This is not this or that. We are doing a complementary work together and a cooperation, actually. Now we move on to our second session, which is International Institutions and Foresight, Experience and Expectations. And I am asking Ms. Randa Abu Al-Husn, resident representative of the UNDP here in Egypt, to chair and moderate and to present our panelists. Please join me in welcoming her.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. First of all, let me start by reiterating thanks to Richard and all of the team that have worked on the different sessions of the Alexandria Dialogue for all the work and the thinking and the planning that has gone into this. I think the past 2 days have been extremely rich, and this is probably our last session. Now we're going to get into some different experiences that have been done by international organizations. We have with us Dr. Clements Reisinger, who is the Senior Research Fellow of the IFRI, which is the International Food Policy Research Institute. Dr. Clements has been in charge of the Middle East and North Africa team of IFRI since 2011 and of Egypt country programs since 2016. He has done a lot of something like, I read over 100 publications. We're going to hear about a lot of the studies that they have done. And I think one of the studies that they are most famous for is the evaluation of Takaful and Karama, probably. Not sure if that's what he will be talking about, but I just wanted to point out that this has been part of his work. We also have Mr. Bruno Myers, who is the representative of UNICEF here in Egypt since 2015. And also UNICEF, as you know, has done a lot of statistical studies, assessment, especially in the areas of social protection, child education, and a number of areas as well. Very rich program here in Egypt. We also look forward to hearing from him. We also have Mr. Eric Oshsling, who is the director of ILO Country Office for Egypt and Eritrea, and he's also in charge of the Decent Work Team for North Africa. And just last week, they were discussing the social protection floor, which is a long-awaited a study that Egypt has been looking at with the Ministry of Social Solidarity. And last but not least, we have Professor Maged Osman, who is an inspiration, more of a coach for all of us. We all go to him in the UN for feedback, for advice. Dr. Maged has worked on a number of things, and not the least of was the National Human Development Report of Egypt on social justice, which was never released, but which engaged a lot of discussions like this one and others on social justice issues. Dr. Maged will be our discussant, and I will also be wearing two hats, that of the moderator and that of a presenter. But first, let me go to Dr. Clemens, please.
So let me start by thanking the Library of Alexandria and the United Nations for inviting IFPRI to this very impressive exercise that you have been going through over the last year or so. It's always a pleasure to come to Alexandria up from Cairo. I must say you have a lot of good things that we don't have in Cairo, which is the fresh air, the sea view, very nice fish that we enjoyed last night. So thank you for having us. So if I kind of reflect on the last day and a half, there is one thing that most of us, I think, agree on, and that is that adding some kind of modeling, quantitative exercise to the largely qualitative work that has been done so far can be beneficial. And for all of you who are not yet convinced, I have a couple of examples, and I can draw on the 2030 strategy or the 2050 work that has been done over the last year here. So let's assume the following. Let's assume we have a model. It's not perfect, but it's a model that captures a lot of the things that we have been discussing over the last years. And we are about to lay out, let's call it a strategy, be it 2030 or 2050, it doesn't matter. So there are two ways we can go about it in terms of planning. So the first thing is, like the colleague from Malaysia has said before, we can set ourselves a target. We want to be an OECD country by 2050. Or we want to eradicate poverty by 2030. The question is, how can we get there? There are different ways. If we had a model, let's call it the Egypt 2050 model for now, that can really show us different pathways, different trade-offs between the different pathways, and whether following this pathway would get us there or not could be hugely beneficial. Now, I think we all agree on that. At the same time, you can think of it from a different point of view. You can also think, okay, let's say we have a 2030 strategy, we have identified several, let's say, promising sectors. So we think manufacturing, tourism, export-led growth is a good idea, like other countries before. Okay, so we could take this assumption and we can feed it into a model and to see what would that actually get us in terms of economic growth, in terms of jobs, in terms of poverty reduction. So you could look at it from both ends, and in both cases, a model can be useful. And now I want to relate this a little bit more to the discussions that we had, and also the experience that I gathered over the last 4 years being in Egypt, working with different government and non-government organizations. So for example, over the last day, we talk a lot about food. And when we talk about food, it's a lot about population. What about the population growth? How much food do we need in 2030? Are we going to produce the food locally? Are we going to import the food? Also, what kind of food are we going to envision? What is the food system that can feed the Egyptian people, not only in terms of quantity, and again, I'm thankful to the colleague from Malaysia, it's also about the quality of food. So nutrition is a very important cornerstone of any strategy. Also, there are links between food, water, and energy. What is the energy mix that we are looking at? And what does that mean? Follow, let's say, the renewable or other energy kind of pathway. What about the water? One of the things that I've learned, yes, there's the Nile, yes, there's the groundwater, but there may even be plans to dig another canal all the way from South Sudan to have a kind of additional canal. What happened if we actually did that? What would that mean for our food production? What would it mean for farmers? What would it mean for income, etc.? Another important thing that I've gathered is the technological change that we are expecting. And there are all these buzzwords about the artificial intelligence. There's all the discussion about how many jobs we have in what sector. In the end of the day, it's a lot about productivity. It's about productivity and people. Again, a model could really help to look at these things in a quantitative way. If we had a higher productivity, fewer jobs in one sector, what are the likely spillovers to other sectors, etc.? Education, obviously, is a very important point. Depending on what kind of development path we are following, is it more manufacturing, is it more services? What is it? What kind of future skills do we need in the labor market, and what does that mean for our educational system? But obviously, we are always interested in development outcomes, like poverty, inequality, also nutrition. So we need a model that can capture these things, and inequality can have very different dimensions. It can be regional inequality, for example, between north and south of Egypt, but it can be between rural and urban areas. It can be between farm households and non-farm households. It has many dimensions, and any useful model to inform a strategy need to capture this kind of outcome level in order to be able to say something about the right development path or the alternatives that exist. And obviously nothing is only, let's say, coming from the sky. There is always things that we can change, governments that have the power to change things in a big way. And what are some of the tools? It's policies and investments. So ideally, our tool would be able not only to cast a way forward, but also to say, okay, we have different tools as a government. We can work on different social protection. We can work on industrial policies, trade policies. We have different leverages. Okay, and such a tool would say, okay, if we did that kind of leverage, what would it get us in terms of development outcomes? Whereas if we followed a different approach, what would be getting out of it? And it was rightly mentioned that an investment plan always has to relate to development targets. So we could even use such a tool to budget. No? Let's assume we would spend 1 billion Egyptian pounds on this and this sector. What are the expected returns? And not only monetary, but developmental. What would it mean for the poor? What would it mean for growth? What would it translate into in terms of inequality and other things? And obviously, and that was mentioned a lot, it's not only about one country these days. We always have to factor in global developments. We may not have complete control over them, but any model should at least be able to inbuild some of the uncertainties that come from global developments, and we have mentioned a few over the last day. It's a lot about climate change. It could be, other kind of shocks, disasters, etc. So that's really important to not forget about the world around us. Now, so the good thing about this is a lot of work has been done in Egypt before, but also ongoing. So it means like there are a couple of models out there that could, help the process of, building such a Egypt 2050 kind of model. And I'm just going to mention a very few. So obviously we have the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, and they have some models, to talk about the macroeconomy, and they have models to kind of decide on the budget cycle and relate them somewhat to the development. There has been a lot of effort to work with the Ministry of Planning also, and obviously that would be an obvious place to encourage more of this kind of work. But also there is international models that we can draw on. So there is, for the macroeconomy, there's the IMF model, which the central bank is partially using. There is, from my own institute, IFPRI, there is a global model to talk about global future food demand and food supply, and how climate change could impact all of this. So the bottom line is there is quite a few models already out there that should be part of the process for the Egypt 2050 model. Now, there is even something more concrete that IFPRI with several Egyptian government organizations have been working on over the last 4 years. We've been working with CAPMAS and also with the Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Others, Agriculture, and some others, to develop, let's say, a model that could be built on, which is a computable general equilibrium model for Egypt, which has a lot of features that I have mentioned before. It's regionalized, it has many sectors, it also has different households, so that we can talk about inequality and poverty, etc. And it has been used, as you have just mentioned, by IFPRI and our partners to look at different policies at this point of time. So we have looked at what is the future of social protection and the trade-offs between, let's say, food subsidy-based system and a cash transfer-based system. We have looked at the impacts of the energy subsidy reform many years ago, before it actually happened, to highlight some of the potential impacts that this can have, and a couple of other things. So let me, to conclude, bring forward a couple of ideas here that also come from my experience here, but also from IFPRI's 40 years of experience in modeling all over the world in more than 50 countries. So what is really important is we have to build on what is already out there. And as I have mentioned, there are quite a few things that have been started. However, we also need to consider that these models are really complicated. No, they are not very easy, and one training workshop will not be enough to teach the people how to apply those tools. So we need a continuous, let's call it a community of practice, to develop really a culture of modeling and quantitative analysis. And from my point of view, this should include both universities. So we need more students to get familiar with this kind of modeling, doing their master thesis, doing their PhD thesis, that by the time they choose to work either in the private sector or in the government, by that time they already are familiar with the modeling and can basically hit the ground running. At the same time, we should continue to work with our government partners to continue not only the capacity building, but also the absorption and the evidence-based policy dialogue that's going on. So also I think we can benefit a lot from what we call big data and digitalization. It has been mentioned a lot that in no country, let's say, the publicly available data is perfect in no country in the world. But nowadays, with the big data, and some of those things have been mentioned, be it satellite imagery, be it data from labor market portals, be it other kind of big data, we can really use those new opportunities to further improve the kind of modeling that we have been doing. So to conclude, I would say, maybe that can also be a theme of this panel, let's work towards a community of practice involving many people to really foster an evidence-based kind of strategy development and policy dialogue going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clemens. Thank you very much. I think that the idea of the community of practice is a very good one. I think that this first Alexandria dialogue organized by the UN Resident Coordinator and the Biblioteca Alexandrina as a first very good starting point to build on with foresight and forecasting, trying to bring them together in many ways. I have to speak as a presenter as well for UNDP, so I'll try to be as brief as I can, but I want to, 2 points, 2 main issues that I'd like to raise in my intervention. First of all, I'd like to build on what Jonathan said earlier in the morning about international futures. We have worked with the Padre Center here in Egypt with the Ministry of Planning, and we've done a series of training on the international futures model, including ministries, government from all of the ministries. I think we have something like 16 ministries involved, academia, researchers, the IDSC in the Prime Minister's office, and many others. So there is a culture. Now, the big question that was asked earlier, I think by Dr. Samir, is how do we go from thinking to doing? How do we go from scenario? I think also Jonathan said it, how do we go from scenario to decisions? And I think this is what we are all asking about. All the questions that you got were more about what are the decisions than what is the thinking that's going on. When we did it with the Ministry of Planning, we ran 5 scenarios under the international futures. The first scenario was the current path. And the result of the current path revealed that if we continue this way, only 6 out of the 17 SDGs will be achieved by Egypt. Then we ran the accent on the economic growth path. And it did produce some good numbers on economic growth, but they were less externalities on development aspects. And then we ran a scenario on invest in women labor force. And that was probably the most catalytic, because investing on family planning and on women's labor force participation in labor will increase unemployment first, but then decrease it. But in the longer run, by 2050, it will reduce population growth, and it is the only scenario that will impact emissions, nutrition, and water scarcity, because none of the scenarios will make any difference for Egypt in terms of water scarcity, in terms of malnutrition, or in terms of gas emissions. Those will never be achieved, no matter what scenario. The fourth scenario was governance, and that was institution, productivity, accountability, transparency, efficiency. That also had an impact on a labor market and on productivity and on development. The fifth scenario was social protection, increase cash transfers, increase focus on the poorer ones, and that had a better impact on human development indices. And the last scenario, which is probably the mission impossible, if I may be cynical myself, is the integrated path, which is bringing all of these scenarios together. That study is available on our website. And this is just the beginning. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The idea is to do a deep dive, and we're looking with the Ministry of Planning if we can do a deep dive on the women investment scenario as a start. But the other point I wanted to bring today is to use this opportunity to make a little scoop for launching the UNDP Human Development Report 2019 on inequality. The report was launched this morning in Bogota. As of 7 a.m. this morning, you can go into the online and you can see the entire report. First country on the list is Norway. Egypt ranked 116. And let me first, before I go into Egypt data, let me give you a little bit of a background on the report itself and what it's called. It's called Beyond Income, Beyond Averages, and Beyond Today, which links very much into the discussion we're having today on foresight. This is the 26th report that dates back to the 90s. Now, when we're talking about beyond income, it goes back to the debate of the 90s, which is you cannot measure development by measuring income only. You have to look at other development aspects in the world, and in the HDI, you look at longevity, you look at health, and you look at income and human capital. Now, this is a new contribution to indices that is looking at other things. So basically, it says that there are inequalities in key elements of human development such as health, education, dignity, and respect for human rights. And these might not be revealed by considering income and wealth inequality alone. The second one is, it says you should measure inequality by looking beyond averages. And too often, the debate about inequality is oversimplified, relying on summary measures of inequality and incomplete data that provide a partial, sometimes misleading picture, both in the sort of inequality to consider and the people affected. The analysis, and this is the key point, the analysis must go beyond averages that collapse information on distribution to a single number and look at the ways inequality plays out across an entire population in different places and over time. The third pillar of the Human Development Report 2019 is that the world is changing and the world requires considering what will shape inequality in the future. Existing and new forms of inequality will interact with major social, economic, and environmental forces to determine the lives of today's young people and their children. And it says there are two seismic shifts that will shape the 21st century. The first is climate change, of course, and the second is technological transformation. Already, climate change is hitting the poorest more, and it is the countries that affect climate change most that are the countries that are least contributing to climate change but are affected most. The entire debate about emissions. So basically, the Human Development Report of UNDP is promoting a human development within a framework that links the expansion of distribution of both capabilities and income. And what is particularly interesting in what is coming out today is what they say about how inequality hurts everyone and how it weakens social cohesion and people's trust in government, institutions, and each other. It is wasteful, preventing people from reaching their full potential. It may hurt economies in society, and when it is extreme, people take to the streets. And this is something that you've discussed already. When we think about current waves of protest, we look that the waves of protest are not just about income. They reflect discontent with unfair social, economic, and political systems. They're not about Gini coefficients or GNIs, but they are concerned about inequality within country, within groups, within regions, within geographies. And they are not only protesting about today, they're worried about the future. So these are the main things. And then the report provides 5 messages. The first is, while many people are stepping up with the MDGs, there was an increase in the achievement of basic indicators. While these have improved, the indicators that are more related to access and quality and change the inequality is growing bigger. The improvement has not been as big, and there have been the haves and the have-nots, the gap is bigger. Then it says a new generation of severe inequalities in human development is emerging, and we need to look at those. Third, inequality in human development can accumulate through life. People are born unequal in our societies today. And this is a key message that is coming out. Fourth, it says assessing inequality in human development demands a revolution in metrics, also something that you discussed. Fifth, redressing inequalities in human development in the 21st century is possible if we act now, before imbalances in economic power translate into entrenched political dominance. There are a lot of political messages in this report, I must say. About Egypt. Egypt's HDI since 1990 has grown from, I think, 0.5 something in 1990, 0.5 something to 0.7. So Egypt has been consistent over the past 2 years. It has now reached 0.7, ranking 116 worldwide, maintaining its 7th rank in Africa and 12th among Arab states. Macroeconomic indicators have shown positive trends due to the efforts and measures and policies Egypt has undertaken. Health, as measured by life expectancy, is also performing steadily. It has gone from 65, I think, to 70, almost 72 now. Mean of schooling has gone from 3.5 to 7.3, and the last one is GNI has also gone up. However, what is very important in this report is that when taking inequalities into account for Egypt, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, Egypt ranks 8 places lower than the actual HDI rank that it has. With similar, this was in 2018, and it's still the same, similar in 2019. In terms of gender equality, while Egypt performs better than average in the Arab states region, it is still the case that the HDI for Egyptian men is 0.732, is much higher than for Egyptian women, which is 0.64. Egypt gross national income, GNI per capita, ranks 16 places higher than according to its human development place. This indicates that Egypt has a lot of potential to improve social protection, women empowerment, education, and governance system, and transform economic growth into investments, resulting in further progress for human development. We at UNDP will be launching the Human Development Report in Arabic in February when the copy comes out. But what I really want to tell you is that when you look at the report, please look at the issues of inequality. And it confirms what you have been discussing for the past 2 days. The most contributing factors to inequality in Egypt are first, education, second, health. Income comes later. And it confirms what the messages of this report are. Poor people are born with poor access to quality education. They are born with poor access to present-day technology. They have the basic technology, but not access to more. They are born with poor access to employment and equality in pre-market, market, and post-market, because inequality in the market must begin before, with educational level, with skills, with capabilities, with access. And therefore, I really urge you to look at the MPI. I urge you to look at the IHDI, which is the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, which says that the average loss on development because of inequality is almost 30%. I will stop here. I think I've taken way too much time than I should have. And I will move over to my colleague, Bruno.
Thank you, Rhonda. Again, thanks to the initiative of the Bibliotheca of Alexandria and Richard for your leadership also there. So thank you for giving us the space to UNICEF. About UNICEF, well, the core of UNICEF works globally in the different regions of the world and country is really preparing for the future of the child and securing it. It's really at the core of UNICEF mandate. And UNICEF, while following its mandate on working for children so that each child survives, thrives, learns, is protected from violence, exploitation, discrimination, grow in a clean environment and has an equitable chance, UNICEF strives to support its partner to provide to children a decent life when they grow up as mature citizens in 2050. So here, investing in the future well-being of a child means ensuring that all children at onset of their life have adequate nutrition and care. So this is one key area of engagement currently in Egypt while we negotiated our country program with the government was about early childhood development. There are global evidence showing that investing $1 in early child development will generate returns for almost $18 as a productive adult. So, you know, the first 2 years of the life of the child, it's where and during this period that most of the brain developed itself. So there is really a crucial period of investment needed there. So it's an important area of engagement with the government because less than 30% of the children, young children, benefit from early childhood integrated program in Egypt. And there are several important initiatives led by the Minister of Education, Ministry of Social Solidarity, just to nominate these two. And we are associated there in modeling, in costing options, I would say, to develop and expand nurseries, for example, in the country. We are there with other partners like the World Bank, very active in this area. Only a few days ago, we contributed to an important nutrition investment plan and costing with the World Bank that was issued 2-3 days ago. So it's more or less 3-4 years of work with the government in mapping nutrition sensitive action and elaborating a national agenda for action, including budgeting and costing and working on scenarios taking into account existing data. So that's one key area of engagement agreed with the government that will definitively have an important impact on the future of the country, taking into account that you still have 2.6 million newborns per year in Egypt, and there is a high need to increase the investment in these early years, as I just mentioned. As part of future preparedness, UNICEF also has included in its program the support in building its digital preparedness, readiness, I would say, and innovation by providing and supporting digital platforms to contribute to help to operationalize and implement and monitor program, but also promote innovative approach to make program more effective while enriching the most vulnerable. Several examples, there are some multimedia campaign that are called أولادنا. So this is all about preventing and fighting against violence against children. We have quite high rate of violence against children in the country, and there are tremendous efforts of government and different institutions of the government on this multimedia campaign, and the digital platform are there a useful tool. SDG monitoring, particularly child SDG related indicators, so there are some important initiatives there in terms of monitoring, but also reporting through a dashboard and mobile application who are available to the public currently. When we speak about some specific tools related to scenario-based forecasting, we following the request of the government, and particularly NCCM and NCW, we are currently working, and we will provide some scenario-based forecasting on FGM, but also on population growth to make, I would say, stronger advocacies to support government's efforts. Social norms. We agreed with the government also in the framework of our cooperation agreement about some significant investment in program related to social norms. There is a global understanding that sustainable change in issues related to, for instance, violence, nutrition habit, I mentioned FGM, I mentioned child marriage also, may only occur if accompanied by change in societal and individual norms that determine certain behavior. So UNICEF is engaging with the government and other partners, I will refer to it, in investing extensively in social and behavior change programming that we know will have an impact, but take in general many years to come. We are working there on building an important body of evidence that can support the country in better tailoring programming and implementing innovative strategy. It's also an important partnership with religious institutions since '85, and the latest one was an important work with Al-Azhar and the Coptic Church on violence against children and promoting, I would say, best practices, but also a lot of research work that was done by the scholars of Al-Azhar and Bless for the Coptic Orthodox Church. So these are important partnerships that needs, years of contribution and work to really change social norms, the ones who have a negative impact on child growth. You know it also, probably, that since many years in many countries, but also including in Egypt, there is unrelenting efforts in prioritization and investing on child health and education program, because it is an effort to support economic readiness of the country over the upcoming decades and years. The challenge there posed by the economic growth, that would need the country to prepare to cater to needs relating to health and education services, is really an important issue that needs, in our view, also more long-term planning and budgeting. We are strongly associated with the World Bank currently in the ambitious education reform that the government launched 2 years ago. It's an important reform. We are working side by side with the Ministry of Education there, because one big piece of this reform is the curriculum revision, is the adoption of life skills and citizenship education regional framework that was adopted by several countries in the region, but including by Egypt. And it's really an investment for the future of the children and young people in this country to prepare themselves better to enter in adulthood, but also in the workforce. Finally, allow me to end with 2 points. Inclusive growth. We spoke about it. So a prosperous country must always ensure prosperity for all its population and children who reside in different locations. So for the moment, there are important initiatives and programs related to the children and the population in North Sinai, and UNICEF is strongly associated there with key investment in human capital, focusing essentially on health, education, and child protection. So it's an important, I would say, development and investment which is ongoing in the country to ensure that no children are left behind, including in some geographical area. My final point will be on the role of data and evidence, what steam and oil meant in the 19th and 20th century. Data and evidence are, I would say, the main propeller of growth for the 21st century. So a strong and robust foresight and future planning can only be built if it is based on current data and evidence. We have some challenge for the moment, particularly in terms of availability of social and health data in the country since 2014. So there are important discussion and effort in which we are associated with UNICEF, and we are optimistic in the sense of that there is a close agreement, I would say, to support the government in its effort in generating new data for the future. And I'm particularly targeting social and health data, which is so crucially needed for any proper planning and budgeting in the country. Thank you. Randa.
Thank you. Eric, ILO. All yours.
Thank you, Randa. First of all, I would like also to thank, like my predecessors, the Biblioteca Alexandrina and Richard for having initiated this dialogue. As the ILO, we have been very pleased to be part of even the preparatory work and in some of the dialogues, including the first one. And I think it's a very useful exercise, also an intellectual exercise, which is very useful also to understand what we can do for Egypt and also what we expect for Egypt in the coming years. Well, I have also to apologize because yesterday I was not able to join because I was traveling from Abidjan to Cairo. But also I'm pleased to see former colleagues from the ILO, Ibrahim Awad yesterday and Dr. Samir Hanwan today. It's as well as a pleasure to see you and also to not to speak on behalf of the ILO, but to see the life after the ILO. Then the ILO is good that we speak after UNICEF because our mandate is on the world of work. Then after being children, we are now at work, and to give you some ideas and perspective from our side. The ILO also this year celebrates its 100th anniversary, and part of our activities was to discuss about the future of work. We did not say the work in 2050 or 2030, but to have a reflection on the future of work. We started in 2016 with national dialogues. We had also sub-regional dialogues, global dialogue. We established a World Commission on Future of Work, which was chaired by the Prime Minister of Sweden and the President of South Africa. And then we ended this process with, at the last International Labour Conference in June, with the adoption of the Centenary Declaration. And the title of the report is Work for a Brighter Future. I think we have to be optimistic. There are a lot of challenges. Doesn't mean that we have to ignore them, but we have to be optimistic also on our future. And that we develop what they have called a human-centered agenda, and with 3 pillars. I will not go into the detail of the report, but just to mention the 3 pillars: increasing investment in people capabilities, increasing investment in the institution of work, increasing investment in decent and sustainable work. Then future of work is for us the future of employment, the future of employment relationship, especially for an organization like the ILO, because we are 3 constituents per country, not only the government, but also what we call the social partners, the workers and the employers' organizations, to see also the future of these 3 constituents. As it was said, we cannot predict the future, of course. If not, will be the new Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, but we can just try to study the trend and to fix, of course, objectives. That's the purpose of the Vision 2030, both at UN or Egypt level. It's also the case of the African Union, because I was also last week, as I said, in Africa, in Abidjan, for the meeting of the ILO regional meeting. And the African Union adopted an agenda, the 2063 agenda, which is beyond even 2050. I also mentioned that because, as you know, the President of Egypt is also the chair of the African Union this year. And the title is The Africa We Want. And I think, yes, that's what we can develop through this dialogue. It was, okay, what is the Egypt we want? Or the Egypt you want as Egyptian? That's also to see the trend, to see the possibility. We mentioned the dreams before. Yes, it's also to design the Egypt we want at the end, in 2050 or later. If you then the exercise is to think about 2050. Now let's have this exercise in 1990. It's 30 years ago. The vision of 2020. What was the vision of 2020? I was of a generation when there was a famous movie called Back to the Future. It's an American movie. I don't know if you know it. And they move in the future, they move in the past, and they move to 2015. I think the movie was done in 1985, something like that. And yes, this is the vision of 2015 in 1985. You see a lot of things happened in terms of we are not yet of the flying cars, but there are cars now without a driver. Of course, the computers have much more evolved. I started my first computer was an Apple IIc, and now when you see an Apple IIc and today computer, you will see the lot of changes in terms of technology, in terms of information. Of course, there is an aspect of social network which have appeared in the meantime. But what was also interesting is the speed of change in the last 30 years, comparing to maybe 1990 to 1960. Then you see quite a huge speed, I would say, in terms of changes. And that's, for me, that's the following point. And also I would like to follow what you say, Rhonda, about inequality. I think in all countries, developed or less developed, you will see a lot of part of the population which are not part necessarily of the changes. Does that mean that they don't have access to internet, or they don't have smartphone, or access to information? They have. But they feel excluded from what we say, it's not necessarily globalization, but I would say that the trend. You have, I'm French, and you see the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jacket movement in France. You see the same thing in a lot of countries with the increase of populism, with part of the population which feel excluded from the economic development. And that's important. It's so linked to the quality of work. A lot of people now find a job, yes, but what is this kind of job? You see in most countries in the world, including in Egypt, an increase of precariousness, and the quality of job has probably decreased also globally. Then it's a challenge also for our institutions to improve the quality of jobs and to improve the quality of employment for people. Then when we discussed this dialogue, and as I participated in the first one, which was on the demographic aspect, of course for Egypt it's a huge challenge. moving from 100 million now to 150 million maybe in 2050. That's a huge challenge in terms of economic, and we need economic growth in that case for sure, because we need to absorb the cost of this demographic expansion. But we need in terms of climate change, in terms of food, it was mentioned also previously. Then there are a lot of different issues which are linked. That's why it's also important to see the model we want in terms of export countries, like it was the case of Malaysia or Turkey, which have done a lot of effort in export. The importance of the domestic market. Yes, I know. And that's also the role of the middle class, which I think should be reinforced in Egypt to support also the domestic market. We need probably to also find some solution to improve the middle class area. It means also in terms of skills, we need new skills policy, new industrial policies. And skills, because of the speed of change, it's not to get skills, it's also to be, in terms of reskill or upskills, to adapt to the new needs of the market. And that's a challenge, or to define the new needs in the market. And for the government, is how they can develop policy because people now probably cannot keep the same job for their life. They need to change. We need to find system like we have flexi security in some European countries, and that's the role of the social protection and an unemployment benefit or the cash transfer, to find a way to continue to provide the same support to people. Then I started with the fact that we, as ILO, we are three constituents: the government, the workers, and the employers' organization. And it's also for them to define their own role in the future. I will not speak about the role of the government. Samir Hadwan mentioned that in his speech, and I will not mention the issue of the format of the cabinet. That's not my role. I leave this issue to him. But even for instance, for the trade union and for business association. Okay, we know that in the last years, they have, in terms of visibility, influence, they have lost some part of their influence, part of their action. But what can they do themselves also to be much more active? And then, and I think the role of the UN and the role of the ILO is for us to discuss, and this dialogue is very useful, to discuss with the Egyptian partners to see how we can assist them, or we can provide our support to design the Egypt they want. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. We're running a bit out of time, but if the organizers will allow us a few more minutes, what you have heard so far can be summarized, for me at least, in terms of from quantity to quality. Everything that's been said here it's not about the quantity, it's not about the numbers, it's about the quality of life, the quality of education, the quality of health, the quality of information, the quality of work. It's really about behavior, which is nowadays, if you see all of the changes that are happening, it's because people are protesting against the quality of what they have, and they want a new quality of life in the midst of a changing world. And this is really what you guys have been talking about all along. Last speaker is Dr. Magid. We all are very anxious to hear what you have to tell us about what we just said. Thank you.
Thank you, Randa. Actually, the session included four representatives of UN agencies in Egypt. I think Egypt is very lucky by having this expertise available for the government and for policymaker and for the civil society. And of course, I'm not in the position of really summarizing what they said or criticizing what they said, but I think they raise very important issues related to first food and what is related to food in terms of water, climate change, and population growth. Randa mentioned the issue of inequality and exclusion and how it is important for creating a lot of tension in societies in general, and this applies to Egypt as it applies to other countries. But the important message that she said, that the main source of inequality is not wealth or income, but it is education. And this is very important for the future. And this will take us to early childhood education and the importance of early childhood education, because if we are thinking about the future, then really we are talking in 2050 about people who were not born now. I mean, the people will be, the youth or the young people or the children with the definition and the international definition are below 18. And below 18 in 2050, they are not born yet. We need to really design the future in a proper way to allow the future to be different. And also, for those people and for people who are born now, decent work is important. And without having a decent work, people are not really, they don't have the chance to be productive. They don't have the chance to have a decent work or to quality of life if their income is very low or they are doing work that is very marginal. But let me try to link the dots of what have been said in this session with what have been said in the morning and what has been said yesterday. I think I will start by mentioning a story that I read. It was in the year 1900, and there was an event in the United States for celebrating the new century, and there was a speech by the director of the Office of Registration for New Inventions. And this man came and said, we had in the last century, that was the 19th century, a number of inventions that was registered, and this never happened before, and it will never happen in the future. His evaluation in 1990 was that the invention that took place in the 19th century was so significant that it will never happen. But I mean, you can imagine now if this guy is still alive, probably he will have a different opinion. But this will take me to a more local context. When I read the newspaper, always I see the word غير مسبوقة. غير مسبوقة in English means unprecedented. Usually, all the achievement or all the programs or all the results of anything is described as غير مسبوقة, as unprecedented. It was so significant that it never happened before. And this always bring to my mind this story. And I think what we have now is that everybody is so happy with any achievement that he thought that he is surprised that this is better than the past. And I think we need to change the way of thinking, that today should be better than yesterday and tomorrow should be better than today. If we think that today is the best thing that we can have, then we are creating actually a glass ceiling that will prevent us from moving forward. Then we need to have a mentality that the future should be better than today. And anything we did today is just something that we did, but this is not the best that we can do. We need to excel more. Related to that, I think we need to move in terms of foresight and in terms of thinking about the future from description to prescription. I think we all agree on the description of the current situation. We have problems in education, we have problems in governance, etc., but we need to have the prescription, what to do exactly. And I think the problem is not the what, but it is the how we are going to do that. And I think thinking about how to do it is really more important. But also, I was thinking of the exercise of the foresight or thinking about the future, etc., all those jargon. Is it only an elitist approach, or it can be a populist approach as well? And can we turn that to something that is popular? Everybody is talking about the future, because actually currently everybody is talking about the past, and we need to reinvent the past using the same tools that has been used before. We need to create the future in the same tools of the past. But I think we need to try to materialize the future vision in a simple way that can be appreciated by the layman. For example, instead of saying that we need to be the best country, مش عارف in so and so and so, or one of the among the best 20, or to be member of the OECD, etc. If we say we need in 2050 or 2040 to have an Olympics in Egypt, the Olympics will be held in Egypt. To have these Olympics, you need to have good public transportation. You need to have clean toilet facilities. But you need to have this not only in Cairo, but in at least 10 cities in Egypt, because the Olympics is really a huge event that is not only in one city, it is like at least in 10 cities. Something like that might be very appealing for the layman, even though maybe if we stay as academician and look at this, we will say that this is trivial or so, but actually this can mobilize a large number of the people to think about the future in a way that is and I myself, I worked in Vision for 2020. At that time, it was in 1995. That was the project of Dr. Ismail Sabri Abdallah and his colleagues. And I worked after that in 2030. I was in IDSCC, and then in 2030 again, and then now 2050. I went through this several times, but I think if we can, regardless of the results of the product, of the results of the document, but if we can make people think about the future in a scientific way, and in an evidence-based way, and in an innovative way, I think this in itself is an achievement, regardless of the product of the document or whether it's going to be achieved partially or totally. Because actually the people are not thinking in a scientific way. They are always taking their decision either in the government or in the private sector, or even on the individual basis or on household base, not on scientific base, or not on evidence-based base, or not on innovative base. I think this in itself can be a change. If you can make the DNA of Egyptian think this way, I think this would be a significant contribution. Just to end my reflection, I think we cannot design the future using the tools of the past, neither the skills of the past, neither the values of the past. And I think if these ideas, with all the ideas that was expressed in these 2 days, can be reflected in the document that was a very valuable document that was summarizing the effort of this last year by UNDP, and I would like to thank Richard and his colleague for that great effort, and Bibliotheca Alexandrina for this as well. I think if we can really integrate all the comments that was said in this conference with the document, I think we can have something very valuable for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Magid. We have 5 minutes left for questions. Okay, let me start over here and then move over here. And then I'll come back here and here. تفضل.
مساء الخير يا فندم، شكرا دكتورة رندا. سؤالي للسيد برنو، بالنسبة لمصر بتواجه مشكلة كبيرة في الكثافة السكانية وخاصة في مجال التعليم. ما هي الرؤية المستقبلية والاستراتيجية لهذه المنظمة في مواجهة هذه المشكلات في الفترة القادمة؟ شكرا يا فندم.
My name is Ahmed Meher. I would like to thank Ms. Randa for highlighting the key important things in the Human Development report launched today. I was reading it early morning before the event. My question I would like to, as my financial background, I would like to know your suggestion for what we have to do financially to achieve development. According to the United Nations Environmental Program, the financial initiative, what we have to invest in as a responsible finance and responsible investing. Shukran. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the participants for the very interesting session. I have a couple of questions for Clemens and for Dr. Osman. For Clemens, you are talking about modeling, and for any kind of modeling and quantitative analysis, you need data. You need input, and you need quality assured data. You need to make sure that you have enough data so that you can feed your models the right way, so that you can have initial boundary conditions, you can have like ways of making the model, like, you know, the initial conditions versus the boundary conditions, so that it can converge and give you some meaningful outputs. What's your take about the data sharing policy here, and the data clarity and data, like, you know, the understanding that data is just a treasure that we cannot share, like, you know, within the same administration, with the same organization, people are not sharing data. So what's your say about that? For Dr. Magid, very quickly, you talk about prescription and description, and you talk about like, you know, how we can move forward. I would like, you know, I would even go into a deeper conversation about that, like, you know, where as a community, when we form to talk about a certain idea, and then at a different stage we start to storm, right? Like, you know, where we are gonna be like, you know, debating and arguing, and which is something healthy, until we norm, until we reach to an agreement, so that we can start to perform. For your prescription or versus description, where are we in terms of forming, norming, storming, and performing? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to refer to two reports that were released by UNDP in cooperation with the MBRF, the Mohammed bin Rashid Foundation, that were released last month. The first one is the Global Knowledge Index, which describes the current situation of countries ranked, and it addresses 7 areas, which is 3 areas in education, pre-university education, higher education, technical education, in addition to ICT and research and innovation, the economy, especially the knowledge economy, and enabling environment. But the most important thing that's relevant to our foresight is the Future Knowledge Index. Future Knowledge Index that were released is unique. Uniqueness is coming from its approach and methodology that is based on the use of big data, the big data approach. It addresses 5 areas, which is artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, blockchain technology, biotechnology, and future skills. And the way they get this data, it included 4 countries, and Egypt was among these countries. And it addresses these issues by examining the traffic on the internet and uses the big data approach to come up with parameters for each country. And I really recommend that this could be examined thoroughly when we are talking about the foresight. And the website that is addressing this is Knowledge for All. Knowledge 4 is number 4, and all details are there in this website. Thank you.
Okay, do I have any more questions? One more. لو سمحت.
Okay. My name is Ahmed Abdulwali, a researcher in the field of pharmaceutical sciences from Zuhail City of Science and Technology. And my question about the role of NGOs in the coming period, to which extent has the role of NGOs, international and local NGOs, will be taken into consideration in the period from 2020 to 2050? Thank you.
I have one last question. I really have to stop here. I can take one more here and one more there, but no more than that, if I may. تفضلي.
I have one comment and one question. It's been very enlightening and rich to know certain terminologies here which can really help in the comprehension of development, such as growth, development, social protection and social justice, extractive and inclusive institutions and political agenda. My question is, there was a presentation saying that the government is taking forward steps in innovation-led growth. My question is, how is that happening with the decline in the private sector, a decline in the middle class, which is the real driver of innovation, and an ineffective patent system under our institution? This is my question. Thank you so much.
The very last, please. And I have to ask you to be, to be very brief.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Ajak in Faculty of Medicine, Alexander University. My question is about gender equality. As we have seen in Africa, there are a few countries which are trying their best, especially Ethiopia and Rwanda. They have improved well, and they're trying their best to increase that. And possibly maybe Egypt is also trying to. What has UN help these other African countries to solve this problem? Because as we say, the higher the position, the lesser the women are, because especially CEO are less compared to men, especially the women. So that's my question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will move immediately to Bruno for the question on...
I have only a few seconds, but I would say that one of the key pillars related to the vision of the Education 2.0 and reform is really to ensure that we have an education system that produces better skilled students, young people acquiring these 14 core skills that the ministry decide to take as really a core framework to revise the curriculum. It's all about skills related to critical thinking, entrepreneurship, communication, problem solving. So I would say that that's a key, one of the key pillars of this vision that will have a positive impact on the upcoming decades. It's coming with a package. The curriculum revision itself. It's already a reality for 6 million children nowadays, KG1, KG2, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. But it's also teacher training with a more interactive approaches in terms of learning, less based on memorization, and then assessment tools also, because the ministry worked with the World Bank and UNICEF to ensure that the right assessment tools are there to measure progress in terms of implementation of this new curriculum. There are other main pillars in which we are perhaps less involved also, but it's about governance, it's about a more efficient system in general, but it's all about to help children to transit more easily and strongly to adulthood and position themselves to the workforce. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Clemens, on data sharing?
On the data, obviously any model is only as good as its underlying data and the underlying assumption. This is very clear. And in any country, there are challenges with data consistency and data sharing. But I would say two good news. So building a model in a community of practice kind of way, meaning involving universities, ministries, think tanks, in itself is an important process that can generate and validate data, because we are bringing people together for a joint objective and a joint validation of data. I just give you one example. If you look at private consumption in GDP, you could get two different sources. No, you could get that from the national accounts, which in Egypt would be compiled by the Ministry of Planning / CAPMAS, or you could get it from the household survey if you aggregate all the consumption of all the households. So you always have two different data points, and that's the case for many numbers in the model. So going through the process of building a model is likely to contribute also to reconciliation and better data sharing. And the second point I would like to make, and it has been mentioned before, there's a lot of big data out there compiled by the private sector, by other players. So that can also help us to better reconcile and improve our models. And then in order to have better policies, better strategies, that better data and models, I think, can really make all the difference.
Okay. Dr. Magid, I'll give you to answer the last two questions, and I'll take the ones related to the UN.
The question of Dr. Askari is very important because we need to evaluate where we are in terms of designing for any future vision. And I think there is a lot of description that's going on. There is a lot of storming that's happening. There is some performing in some sectors. And I think we are on the right track in terms of, for example, if we think about some sectors like electricity, maybe energy, etc., but not across the board. But the challenging part is how to integrate things, and maybe Randa mentioned that we need to integrate different sectors together, because it's not a matter of working alone, working separately. It has to be sort of interlinked, and we need to find also the accelerator that will take us. Because we cannot really divide all or distribute all our limited resources on everything. We need to sort of focus and to see what are the accelerator that will take us quickly to the target that we need to achieve. But I think maybe the brainstorming need to sort of focus a little bit, not on getting each and everybody on board and agreeing on each and every details, because this is impossible in any country of the world, but to agree at least on accelerator and on focus, and to be reflected in the government policies in terms of allocating resources. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to answer the questions about the UN, and my answer is not to go into any of the technical details, but to tell you that the UN is not you sitting there and us sitting up here. The UN can only provide the tools and the means and the thinking together with governments and all the stakeholders to bring about the change, to dive into the issues, find the problems, try to come up with solutions. That's one. So if it's not integrated, it's not going to work. It will continue to drag, and that's what every agency of the United Nations and of the international community and of academia will tell you anywhere you go. Because there's something called externality. If you have better health, then there's likely that you will be more alert to get a better education. Or if your mother has better health, then the children will have better opportunities at education. So it's all interwoven together. And that's why the issue of behavioral insight that Bruno talked about is critical. We're saying that quantities and numbers are not enough. It's quality. And therefore, any change that happens because there's a behavior reaction to a certain reality. And therefore, to get to the future that you want to get, you need to prepare the behavior that will achieve the future. So it has to be an integrated approach. As for the knowledge report, yes, Egypt is one of the countries. There's a lot of talk in that report about getting Egypt ready for the fourth industrial revolution in terms of knowledge, in terms of capabilities and skills. There's also an application that you can download on your smartphone with all of the data for that report. And there is going to be a launch with the Ministry of Education in January here in Egypt. So thank you for bringing that up. But all of these reports are only as good as their use. They're only as good as people take them into. It doesn't have to be government. It can be any one of us. Everyone is a player, and that's always a message that I try to give. It's not them or us. And we have a tendency to keep saying they. It's all of us, because everyone is a player, you know. And it's like having a car accident. It doesn't matter. You were in the way somehow. Whether it's your fault or not, you were there at that time. So with that, I thank you. And Eric, I don't know if you want to say any last words.
I would say last word, because we cannot leave without speaking about gender equality, because there was one question.
Thank you.
And our friend Blerta will kill us if we don't speak about gender equality. Very quickly, of course, but in terms for the UN, there is a specific program of the UN called UN Women. But for all agencies, we have a focus on gender equality, and it's cross-cutting on all of our activities. Mainly the legislative aspect, of course, and the implementation of the law, but also the practical aspect, and with the cultural difference. For instance, in Egypt, the legislation is relatively equal, but when you see the practice, especially by the private sector, you will see a difference, and also in cultural aspect with a very low participation of women on the labor market. Then for the UN, we work at different aspects, the political level, legislative, but also, I would say, at all levels. But for all agencies, it's clearly a priority.
Thank you very much. I thank everyone. Thank you, Biblioteca Alexandrina, and thank you, Richard. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much.